Hey there, so I've been wanting to make some parts to 3D print so I can convert my Angron model for my World Eaters army. I've been in love with the design of the one-eyed owl from Tokyo Ghoul ever since I first saw her, and I wanted to base my model off of that design. I started by gathering all the reference images I like. I mostly got references from the manga version because I just prefer the design a bit more, but I also did get screenshots of almost every scene from the anime that she's in as well. I did do some rough sketches to get an idea of what I wanted the design to look like. Since I want the design to be visually unique somewhat, I took a few variations to get the right balance I liked that was unique enough for me but also looked close enough to the reference. I started the sculpture with just a Dynamesh sphere in ZBrush like usual, and just spent a while blocking out general shapes so that I could get the facial features blocked in and finalize the general proportions of the head. I like to try and keep most of the sculpt one mesh early on, it's just much easier to manipulate like that, but just not needing to switch between subtools and merge and delete and hiding everything just makes it a lot easier to get the early stages done a lot quicker. At first I wanted the mouth to be open wide, like in some of the reference images, so I made all the teeth separate parts just to make it that bit easier to work with, but later on I decided to close the mouth and try to get a more grinning look closer to the reference images rather than the roaring, angry kind of design, just because I prefer the weird, uneasy kind of smile that she has in the books and in the anime. I didn't record that part of the process since it was just a quick change I made at the last minute, but I think it did make quite a big difference in the overall look of the model. I did initially also want to remake the whole multiple pupils in one eye kind of thing that she has in some of the manga panels, but I ended up deciding against it because it just, as much as I liked the look, it just seemed a little bit too kind of generic and drone-like, and I wanted something a bit more unique, which the single pupil, it made it seem like a more unique design rather than some generic rank and file kind of demon, and more like some big character with a personality. The horns and the tusks were probably the part that I struggled with the most on this. I'm not sure why, but it's just something that I struggle a lot with in general. I just struggle to come up with anything that looks kind of natural and organic looking, and it doesn't quite work for me. So I did end up looking at some other designs like the Reaper Leviathan in Subnautica, which, now that I mention, I'm only realizing how old that game is. But I did eventually manage to come up with some designs that I liked. I really liked the whole kind of mandible looking horns that she has near her mouth, but I just wanted to try and come up with a bit more unique looking horns that weren't the generic, demon devil horns kind of thing that you would see on most demons outside 40k. To try and make the horns a bit more unique, I decided to try and add some jewelry almost type designs to them. Wanted to kind of give it a look of it being a high-ranking demon that's wearing like ornate trinkets and decorations to kind of match the armor that I'll be using from the Angron model. I didn't want to overcomplicate this part because that's what I usually end up doing, so I just polymodeled the vast majority of the hoops in Blender and then use polygroups to crease and dynamic subdivide the edges. Having a dynamic subdivision on this allows me to get the poly count to be much higher, but still let the poly count match what's actually necessary to keep the shape. Once I got the poly count up, I used the generic mask brushes in ZBrush to kind of draw on some random runes and stuff. It's been a while since I actually did this step, so I can't remember, but I think I did take some quotes out of movies and stuff. I can't remember what rune language font I used though, so it could say anything really. I liked how the engravings came out, but later on these proved to be a little bit too small to show up on the actual 3D print. I think they did a good enough job to break up the flat surfaces, but the actual scripts are not really readable on the final product. I ended up also deciding to remake some of the weapons as well, as the character won't be Angron in these are the more mandible-like tusks I decided on. I really liked how they came out for something that I didn't really plan too much in the sketches. Is a test print of how the finished head looks. As you can see, not all the details carried over perfectly, but I think all the key features are there and distinct enough that the print didn't lose much of the original design. As for the scale, I just kind of guessed and got lucky. I printed out a couple of different sizes at once and I got lucky within the first batch. So I got rid of so many areas of spine grinder to replace them with some different weapons. I ended up basing the design off the Blades of Chaos from God of War. That's what I based most of the design off of. And again, I started with just a really rough Dynamesh blockout, but this time I decided to refine it with Z-spheres to retopologize the mesh, and retopology being manually creating a new wireframe of the mesh, so it's just generally much cleaner and matches the shape a lot closer and more intentional. It also just cuts down on the number of polys, but some main reason I'm using it here is so I can reuse the same method of poly grouping, creasing and dynamic subdividing, just to get the poly count up, but keeping everything nice and clean. I've always really liked the design of the more retro 40k skulls that you see in a lot of the official art, so I knew I wanted to incorporate that somehow. I decided to end up trying to kind of embed or engrave them into the bodies of the blades the way that they did on the original Sam Arias design with the skulls. They weren't quite as complex to sculpt as I would have expected, but they were definitely an interesting thing to try and recreate. I didn't want to spend too much time on these hands, but they aren't really the main point of interest by far, so I just did some rough talon-like claws and just tried to imply some human-like anatomy, just to try and break up a lot of the smooth surfaces, so we've got the implications of like the tendons and muscles in the backs of the fingers and the wrist. Now, the size of the hands was a bit more important than the head, so I measured the voids left in the braces on the model with some calipers, and then I went into Tinkercad and just made a cube with the rough dimensions of the cuffs. And then I used that cube to scale the hands to match with the hole in the braces. Then it was just as simple as loading them into Jitterbox and doing a couple more size variations just in case my measurements were a bit off. Once I got the blades printed out, I did some size comparisons with the model, as you can see here. I compared the different scales just to make sure everything was proportionate and tried to figure out which size I wanted because I wasn't 100% sure. Overall, I'm really happy with how they came out. I think I managed to get the other design. I'm definitely going to be making some more stuff like this. I really want to try making some full-size props, either from 4K or some other games that I'm into. I think I want to try making some custom Chaos Spawn proxies next, maybe. I'm definitely going to be doing more, so if you have any suggestions at all, then I'd love to hear them. So thanks for watching, and hopefully I will see you next time.